Leave your comfort zone. During my junior year of high school, I spent hours poring over catalogs trying to decide which colleges to apply to. Beyond getting a degree, I felt that going to college would give me the opportunity to reach more students with the pro-life message, and possibly save more lives. I considered some liberal arts schools, such as the University of Chicago, and I even won a scholarship to Hillsdale, a top conservative liberal arts college in Michigan. Hillsdale had been my dream college throughout high school. I loved the idea of studying the great literature of Western civilization with like-minded, passionate peers. But I decided that while I needed to continue studying, I didn't want to attend a school where most of the students already knew that abortion was wrong. Instead, I wanted to go where there was a lot of need, where students might never hear the pro-life message. I debated between UC Berkeley and UCLA, and ultimately landed on UCLA. It was bigger than Berkeley, and it was located in the heart of the world's entertainment capital. I decided there would be more opportunity to spread the pro-life message there. UCLA was where my mission took me next. Wherever I went, I knew there would be women at risk, and lives in danger. Planned Parenthood, the nation's largest abortion chain, had been targeting college-aged women for years. Knowing that women between the ages of 18 and 24 have 44% of all abortions, Planned Parenthood is strategic in targeting them. For example, the Planned Parenthood Generation Action Network is a network of young organizers and activists across the country who organize events on their campuses and in their communities to mobilize advocates for reproductive freedom. I didn't know exactly how I would fight back against Planned Parenthood once on campus, but I would do my best to figure it out. I also understood how young pregnant women, especially college students, could feel pressure to get an abortion. By the time they got to college, students understood the stigma and stress of being pregnant, were wary of the adoption process, and were afraid of how an unwanted baby would interfere with the plans they had for their lives. These students would be especially susceptible to abortion propaganda. Unmarried and feeling financially and emotionally unprepared for a baby, many young women listen when told that abortion is the right choice. Some women have chosen abortion for no deeper reason than to maintain their lifestyle. Abortion advocates never admit this, but if data from the state of Florida is any indication, at least 75% of abortions in this country could be elective, meaning they are likely committed for the convenience of the mother. And that number doesn't include abortions done for social, economic, or emotional concerns. UCLA, 40,000 students strong, offered me a lot of opportunity to do some good. With such a large student body, I also thought I would find many other pro-life students with whom I could team up. Packing my suitcase and leaving my parents' home for Los Angeles, I felt the nervous anticipation that most first-year college-bound students feel. But wrapped up in the anticipation was also a strong sense of calling. I felt I was on a pro-life mission, not just an educational mission. During my first week at UCLA, I applied the same strategy I had used in my high school years. Find out who was already doing pro-life work and join them. If such an organization didn't exist, I'd start one. After attending the UCLA Freshman Activity Fair, starting one seemed like the only option. Hundreds of tables set up in a long line of tents, I could not find a single table representing a pro-life club. Surely, among the 40,000 students, there had to be other pro-lifers. It turned out I was right. A few days later, I noticed a table on Bruin Walk with a sign that read, "Are you pro-life?" Sitting at the table reading a book was a tall girl with a wide-brimmed straw hat. "Hey, thank you for being here," I greeted her. "My name is Lila, and I'm pro-life too." She looked up from her book. "That's great. Nice to meet you. I'm Esther." Not wanting to be late for class, I set up a meeting to connect with her later. Esther was the vice president of Bruins for Life, and she would be joined by her president, Liz. The next day, we met outside and sat at a picnic table. Esther and Liz were both seniors who would graduate at the end of that school year. "It's so great you're a freshman," said Liz cheerfully, taking charge of our meeting. "Otherwise, the club might die out." "Die out?" I asked, alarmed. "Aren't there other people in the group?" "You're looking at the group," Liz said. "It's just the two of you?" I was shocked that at a campus of 40,000 would have only 2 students willing to stand up for life. Were there really only 3 of us? I would find out later that there had been several others in the club, but they had almost all graduated the previous year, leaving Liz and Esther as the only leaders. They were on the hunt for new recruits, and freshmen like me would have the longest shelf life. "Would you like to be the club treasurer?" Liz offered. "Well, sure," I asked tentatively. "How much money do you have in the bank?" "Well, we don't have a bank account," said Esther, "but we could get one." "Where do you keep your money?" They explained they didn't have any, but that we could raise money and use it to host events. I felt a growing anxiety as we talked. There was so much to do, and I felt there had to be other pro-life students on campus. We just had to find them and rally them. "I really appreciate that you are both involved in pro-life," I said, "but I think I need to start another group." I came to UCLA to do pro-life activism. I told them about what we'd been doing in San Jose. I'd like to bring the strategies I've learned there to this campus. "That's great," said Liz enthusiastically, "but you don't need to start another group. How about you just be president?" I was impressed by how humble and eager she was to hand me her position. Both Esther and Liz graciously accepted the name change from Bruins for Life to Live Action UCLA, and we started planning events. I found out later that they had been praying specifically for a new freshman to help grow beautiful. The pro-life club at UCLA. Liz, who would become a dear lifelong friend, came from a strong family tradition of pro-life advocacy. Her dad, Dr. T. Murphy Goodwin, was a leading perinatologist and a well-known pro-life advocate. Later on, Esther introduced me to a women's center near campus that would change my life. More on that in Chapter 12. As we 3 joined forces, our little group would go on to recruit dozens of students in the coming months. During my freshman orientation, administrators performed a skit about condom use and the importance of safe sex. They joked that, while there might be virgins in the audience, it was unlikely we'd stay that way for long. The freshman class was told the virtues of practicing protection, and the healthcare center on campus had bowls of condoms on its counters. I found it sad and offensive that UCLA thought so little of their students, that, while it expected the best of us academically, it expected the least of us when it came to sexual morality. UCLA administrators clearly expected students to have sex, and therefore encouraged the use of contraceptives. The reality, however, is that even when used regularly, contraceptives are far from 100% effective. For example, according to the Centers for Disease Control, condoms have a 13% failure rate, diaphragms a 17% failure rate, and spermicides a 21% failure rate. In fact, according to Planned Parenthood's research arm, the Guttmacher Institute, half of the women who sought an abortion were using a contraceptive in the month they got pregnant. On a campus where sex was encouraged and drinking and drugs were common, contraceptives use could be a hit or miss. What then? I wonder how many students at UCLA might be getting pregnant and what happened to them. I never saw pregnant students on campus. Where were they? When I started researching, I discovered that in the previous year, the Arthur Ashe Student Health and Wellness Center on campus processed more than 2,000 pregnancy tests. This same article on pregnancy counseling made no reference to any resources for pregnant or parenting students or alternatives to abortion. The only options discussed were referrals for psychological counseling or pregnancy termination. As to counseling, the advice offered by the nurse of Women's Health Services was this: it's okay to regret, it's okay to feel sorry. I just don't want them to beat themselves up about it in the future. The "it" was shorthand for abortion. I can find no information at the center about resources for pregnant students beyond abortion, and no resources for parenting or adopting. I wasn't sure what to do with the information I was discovering about UCLA's pro-abortion bias, but I knew that in order to make an impact at school, I needed to get more involved in campus activities. I was also eager to make friends, make an impact, and explore what UCLA had to offer. I rushed a sorority, which I joined and then left after 6 months, ran pro-life meetings, scheduled speakers, visited a dozen different campus groups, and wrote for the campus paper, The Daily Bruin. For all that intentional exploration, the event that set me on a new path was unexpected. One Saturday, I grabbed a to-go salad on my way back to campus after doing some volunteer work at a nearby pregnancy resource center that morning. I was running late for a workshop sponsored by a group called the Leadership Institute, a conservative organization based out of Washington, D.C. I took a seat in the back, discreetly ate my salad, and watched a tall, young man, overdressed in slacks and a button-down shirt, make a surprisingly dynamic presentation on student journalism. I say surprising, because there were only about half a dozen libertarians and young Republicans there to listen to the talk in a grungy dorm ruck area. I wasn't even sure if I was a Republican myself, but I was pro-life and socially conservative, and Republicans accepted these views much more readily than Democrats. The speaker happened to be James O'Keefe, then a recent college graduate who was working for the Leadership Institute and who, years later, would establish his own activist organization. What I liked about James was his spunk. Passionate and idealistic, James was fresh out of Rutgers University and determined to change the world. He and I became friends, bonding over our shared commitment to the kind of activism that could make a difference. I explained to him my goal of helping educate fellow students about abortion, especially in light of the fact that UCLA had no pro-life resources for pregnant students. I confessed, though, that I did not know where to begin. The Daily Bruin would only publish so many pro-life articles, and I wanted to start an independent magazine. But I wasn't sure how to report on the problems I was seeing on campus. "Why don't you just investigate the health center yourself?" James asked. It was a great question, albeit a daunting one. I've always loved to act. A natural-born empath, I often imagine and even feel what others might be feeling. Acting is an opportunity to step inside another person's experience and try to feel everything they do. It's been an outlet for me since I was a young girl, from nativity plays at church to competing in dramatic interpretation events in high school. I would eventually even join the mock trial team at UCLA and play a witness, a social worker infected by a client's HIV needle. Acting was one of my gifts. Here was a chance to use it. James and I came up with a plan to find out what the health center was actually telling students who might be pregnant. I would visit the health center as myself, a student, using my campus ID, all easy enough, but say that I might be pregnant and needed help. Would they be able to help me? What would they say? According to plan, James and I walked into the ASH Center. I showed my ID and asked to speak with a nurse privately. I felt oddly calm. My sense of purpose overcame any discomfort I felt. Of course, I wasn't pregnant, and James wasn't even a student, but I wasn't about to share either fact with the center staff. The nurse brought James and me into a private room, and we sat down. I explained that I might be pregnant, and James was my friend, there for moral support. Unsurprisingly, the nurse's goals did not include helping me care for a preborn child. Instead, her goal, I realized quickly, was to encourage me to have an abortion. UCLA doesn't support women who are pregnant or help them necessarily, the nurse said flatly. When I asked what other options I had as a pregnant student, she said that carrying the pregnancy to term on campus would be embarrassing to me and my fellow classmates because I might need to use the bathroom during class. When I asked about adoption, she discouraged it, explaining it would be like giving away a present. Nothing was said about the fact that this beautiful act of sacrificial love would mean that a child would live rather than die. For this nurse, the center's idea of health and wellness was abortion. She explained that she could refer me to 2 UCLA doctors who could do an abortion. Better still, they might even find a way to use state Medicaid funds to pay for the abortion, so the charge wouldn't show up on my parents' insurance. We left shortly after that. With a $1,000 grant from the Leadership Institute, Live Action UCLA created a magazine called The Advocate. In its initial issue, we published the story of our encounter at this health center and distributed several thousand copies around campus with the headline, "Where have all the pregnant women gone?" This was my first real plunge into independent media, the battleground for much of my pro-life activism. The people at the health center were not pleased. My team members and I used the article as an opportunity to ask for meetings with university administrators. Our goal was to persuade UCLA to give a voice to those promoting alternatives to abortion. We had mixed results. Several administrators met with us. None denied the legitimacy of our request or explicitly stated that pregnant students shouldn't have options, but no one wanted to upset the campus status quo by changing anything. We also asked to meet with the nurse, and I was surprised when she agreed. Even though I was visiting her undercover when we first met, I felt a strong connection with her, and so I wrestled with what I should say when we met again. I thought that perhaps she didn't realize the harm she was doing. I hoped that maybe she would begin to see the lack of justice and compassion in her pro-abortion stance. Unfortunately, that did not happen. She seemed totally shut off to the pro-life perspective. She stood by everything she had said in our first meeting, but she also claimed that I had represented her inaccurately. How so? I asked her. What did I write about you that was inaccurate? She couldn't answer and changed the subject to discuss my agenda. Of course, I had an agenda, I tried to explain, and it was this. No child should be dehumanized, destroyed, and discarded. No woman should be told that there is no one to help her carry her baby and care for her newborn. All women should be encouraged to embrace their children, not to abort them. But I felt as if she did not hear what I was saying. This second meeting with the nurse disturbed me as much as the first. I was grieved when I walked out of the clinic, because, despite our conversation, she seemed unmoved. Still, Live Action UCLA had made waves, starting a much-needed conversation on campus about the lack of pregnancy resources at UCLA. Stay tuned for the next part of this chapter coming up shortly.